Y'all, I'm gonna have to read fast today. Oh, this is Manon. Hi, I am an idiot and I forgot that I have a dinner at 7. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. We're gonna have to read through really fast, but I just checked without spoiling anything too big for myself. I think I can just read 9 through 11 today, and then I'll read 12 Saturday. No. Yeah, Saturday. I'm also gonna have to do... Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, because I saw Manon's name in 12, but I didn't all I checked was for names. So I think I can skip 12, and I'll just do 9 and through 11 today. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get started because I have to leave here by 6:30. So it gives me a little under an hour. So I'm gonna go get started. I upload these to YouTube anyway, so if you join late, I'll post it to my YouTube so you can watch it. Okay, chapter 9. After Aelin wrote the damning letter to Arabin and sent it via one of his feral street urchins, hunger dragged her from the apartment into the grey morning. Bone-tired, she hunted down breakfast, also buying enough for lunch and dinner, and returned to the warehouse an hour later to find a large, flat box waiting on the dining table. No sign of the lock having been tampered with, none of the windows open any farther than they'd been when she cracked them to let in the river breeze that morning. But she expected no less from Arabin, no less than a reminder that he might be king of the assassins, but he'd clawed and slaughtered his way onto that self-made throne. It seemed fitting, somehow, that the skies opened up just then, the patter and clink of the downpour washing away the too heavy silence of the room. Aelin tugged at the emerald silk ribbon around the cream-colored box until it dropped away. Setting aside the lid, she stared at the folded cloth for a long moment. The note placed atop it read, "I took the liberty of having some improvements made since the last time. Go play." Her throat tightened, but she pulled out the full-body suit of black cloth, tight, thick, and flexible like leather, but without the sheen and suffocation. Beneath the folded suit lay a pair of boots. They'd been cleaned since the last time she'd worn them years ago, the black leather still supple and pliable, the special grooves and hidden blades as precise as ever. She lifted the heavy sleeve of the suit to reveal the built-in gauntlets that concealed thin, vicious swords as long as her forearm. She hadn't seen this suit, hadn't worn it since... She glanced at the empty spot on the mantel. Another test. A quiet one, to see just how much she would forgive and forget, how much she would stomach to work with him. Fuck him. Arabin had paid for the suit years ago, an exorbitant fee demanded by a master tinkerer from Melisande, who had crafted it by hand, built exactly to her measurements. He'd insisted his 2 best assassins be outfitted in the stealthy, lethal suits, so hers had been a gift, one of many he'd heaped on as reparation for beating her to hell and then packing her off to the Red Desert to train. She and Sam had both taken brutal beatings for their disobedience, and yet Arabin had made Sam pay for his suit, and then given him second-rate jobs to keep him from swiftly paying off the debt. Fuck him. Oh, she could play the devoted protege again. She could go along with the plan she'd let him create, the plan she'd modify slightly, just enough. She'd kill whoever was needed, whore herself, wreck herself, if it meant getting 80 into safety. 2 days. Just 2 days, until she could see him again, until she could see with her own eyes that he'd made it, that he'd survived all these years they'd been apart. And even if Adian hated her, spat on her as Chaol had practically done, it would be worth it. Naked, she stepped into the suit, the smooth, slick material whispering against her skin. Typical of Arabin, not to mention what modifications he'd made, to make it a lethal puzzle for her to sort out, if she was clever enough to survive. She shimmied into it, careful to avoid triggering the mechanism that brought forth those hidden blades, feeling for any other concealed weapons or tricks. It was the work of another moment before the suit enveloped her completely, and she buckled her feet into the boots. As she headed for the bedroom, she could already sense the reinforcement added to every weak spot she possessed. The specifications must have been sent months before the suit arrived, by the man who did indeed know about the knee that sometimes twanged, the body parts she favored in combat, the speed with which she moved. All of Arobyn's knowledge of her, wrapped around in cloth and steel and darkness. Damn, he really be watching her, huh? She paused before the standing mirror against the far wall of the bedroom. A second skin, perhaps made less scandalous by the exquisite detailing, the extra padding, the pockets, the bits of armored decoration. But there was not 1 inch left to the imagination. She let out a low whistle. Very well, then. She could be Selena Sardothian again, for a little longer, until this game was finished. She might have brooded over it more had splashing hooves and wheels halting outside the warehouse not echoed through the open windows. She doubted Arobyn would show up so soon to gloat. No, he'd wait until he learned whether she actually went to play with the suit. That left one other person who'd bothered to come by, though she doubted Cale would waste money on a carriage, even in the rain. Keeping away from sight, she peered out the window through the downpour, taking in the details of the nondescript carriage. No one on the rainy street to observe it, and no sign of who might be within. Heading for the door, Aylin flicked her wrist, releasing the blade on her left arm. It made no sound as it shot free from the hidden slot in the gauntlet, the metal gleaming in the rain-dim light. Gods, the suit was as wondrous as it'd been the first day she tried it on, the blade cutting as smoothly through the air as it had when she'd plunged it into her targets. Her footsteps and the drumming of the rain on the warehouse roof were the only sounds as she descended the stairs, then padded between the crates piled high on the main floor. Left arm angled to hide the blade within the folds of her cloak, she hauled open the giant rolling warehouse door to reveal the veils of rain billowing past. A cloaked woman waited under the narrow awning, an unmarked handsome cab for hire loitering behind her on the curb. The driver was watching carefully, rain dripping off the broad rim of his hat. Not a trained eye, just looking out for the woman who'd hired him. Even in the rain, her cloak was a deep, rich gray, the fabric clean and heavy enough to suggest lots of money despite the carriage. Who the fuck is this? The heavy hood concealed the stranger's face in shadow, but Aylin glimpsed ivory skin, dark hair, and fine velvet gloves reaching into her cloak for a weapon. Start explaining, Aylin said, leaning against the doorframe, or you're rat meat. The woman stepped back into the rain. Not back, exactly, but toward the carriage, where Aylin noted the small form of a child waiting inside, cowering. The woman said, I came to warn you, and pulled back her hood just enough to reveal her face. Large, slightly up-tilted green eyes, sensuous lips, sharp cheekbones, and a pert nose combined to create a rare, staggering beauty that caused men to lose all common sense. No. There's no way in hell. Is this Lysandra? Aylin stepped under the narrow awning and drawled, as far as memory serves. It sure as hell is! What the fuck is she doing? Bitch! Aylin stepped under the narrow awning and drawled, as far as memory serves me, Lysandra, I warned you that if I ever saw you again, I'd kill you. Please, Lysandra begged. That word, and the desperation behind it, made Aylin slide her blade back into its sheath. In the 9 years she'd known the courtesan, never once had she heard Lysandra say please, or sound desperate for anything at all. Phrases like thank you, may I, or even lovely to see you had never been uttered by Lysandra within Aylin's hearing. They could have been friends as easily as enemies, both of them orphaned, both found by Arobyn as children. But Arobyn had handed Lysandra over to Clarice, his good friend and a successful brothel madam, and though Aylin had been trained for killing fields, and Lysandra for bedrooms, they'd somehow grown up rivals, clawing for Arobyn's favor. When Lysandra turned 17 and had her bidding, it was Arobyn who had won, using the money Aylin had given him to pay off her own debts. The courtesan had then thrown what Arobyn had done with Aylin's blood money in her face, so Aylin had thrown something back at her, a dagger. They hadn't seen each other since. Aylin figured she was perfectly justified in tugging back her hood to reveal her own face and saying, It would take me less than a minute to kill you and your driver and to make sure your little protege in the carriage doesn't say a peep about it. She'd probably be happy to see you dead. Lysandra stiffened. She's not my protege, and she's not in training. So she's to be used as a shield against me? Aylin's smile was razor sharp. Please, Please, Lysandra said over the rain. I need to talk to you. Just for a few minutes, where it's safe. Aelin took in the fine clothes, the hired cab, the rain splashing on the cobblestones. So typical of Arobynn to throw this at her. But she let him play this hand, see where it got her. Aelin squeezed the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers, then lifted her head. You know I have to kill your driver. No, you don't, the man cried, scrambling to grab the reins. I swear, I won't breathe a word about this place. Aelin stalked the handsome cab, the rains instantly soaking her cloak. The driver could report the location of the warehouse, could endanger everything, but Aelin peered at the rain-flecked cab permit framed by the door, illuminated by the little lantern hanging above. Well, Kellen Oppel of 63 Baker Street, apartment 2. I suppose you won't tell anyone. White as death, the driver nodded. Aelin yanked open the carriage door, saying to the child, Get out. Both of you inside, now. Evangeline can wait here, Lysandra whispered. Aelin looked over her shoulder, rain splattering her face as her lips pulled back from her teeth. If you think for one moment that I'm leaving a child alone in a hired carriage in the slums, you can go right back to the cesspit you came from. She peered into the carriage again and said to the cowering girl, Come on, you. I won't bite. That seemed to be enough assurance for Evangeline, who scooted closer, the lantern light gilding her tiny porcelain hand before she gripped Aelin's arm to hop from the cab. No more than 11. She was delicately built, her red gold hair braided back to reveal citrine eyes that gobbled up the drenched street and woman before her. As stunning as her mistress, or would have been, were it not for the deep, jagged scars on both cheeks, scars that explained the hideous, branded-out tattoo on the inside of the girl's wrist. She'd been one of Clarice's acolytes, until she'd been marred and lost all value. Aelin winked at Evangeline and said with a conspirator's grin as she led her through the rain, You look like my sort of person. Aelin propped open the rest of the windows to let the rain-cooled river breeze into the stuffy apartment. Thankfully, no one had been on the street in the minutes they'd been outside, but if Lysandra was here, she had no doubt it would get back to Arobynn. Aelin patted the armchair before the window, smiling at the brutally scarred little girl. This is my favorite place to sit in the whole apartment, when there's a nice breeze coming through. If you want, I have a book or 2 that I think you'd like. Or, she gestured to the kitchen to her right, you might be able to find something delicious on the kitchen table. Blueberry tart, I think. Lysandra was stiff, but Aelin didn't particularly give a damn as she added to Evangeline. Your choice. As a child in a high-end brothel, Evangeline had probably had too few choices in her short life. Lysandra's green eyes seemed to soften a bit, and Evangeline said, her voice barely audible over the patter of the rain on the roof and windows, I would like a tart, please. A moment later, she was gone. Smart girl, to know to stay out of her mistress's way. With Evangeline occupied, Aelin slung off her soaked cloak and used the small remaining dry section to wipe her wet face. Keeping her wrist angled in case she needed to draw the hidden blade, Aelin pointed to the couch before the unlit fire and told Lysandra, Sit. To her surprise, the woman obeyed, but then said, Or you'll threaten to kill me again? I don't make threats, only promises. The courtesan slumped against the couch cushions. Please, how can I ever take anything that comes out of that big mouth seriously? You took it seriously when I threw a dagger ordered. We reading erotica? No. No? She glanced at the street below. The cab lingered as ordered. Arobynn couldn't send you in one of his carriages. I thought he was paying you handsomely. Lysandra waved her hand, the candlelight catching on a golden bracelet that barely covered a snake-like tattoo stamped on her slender wrist. I refused his carriage. I thought it set the wrong tone. Too late for that. So he did send you then, to warn me about what exactly. He sent me to tell you his plan. He doesn't trust messengers these days, but the warning comes from me. An utter lie, no doubt, but that tattoo, the sigil of Clarice's brothel, etched on the flesh of all her courtesans from the moment they were sold into her house. The girl in the kitchen, the driver below, they could make everything very, very difficult if she gutted Lysandra. But the dagger was tempting as she beheld the tattoo. Not the sword. No, she wanted the intimacy of a knife, wanted to share breath with the courtesan as she ended her. Aelin asked too quietly, Why do you still have Clarice's sigil tattooed on you? Do not trust Archer, Nehemiah had tried to warn her, drawing a perfect rendering of the snake in her coded message. But what about anyone else with that sigil? The Lysandra that Aelin had known years ago. Two-faced, lying, and conniving were among the nicer words Aelin had used to describe her. Lysandra frowned down a bit. We don't get it stamped out until we've paid off our debts. The last time I saw your whoring carcass, you were weeks away from paying them off. Indeed, Arobynn had paid so much at the bidding 2 years ago that Lysandra should have been free almost immediately. The courtesan's eyes flickered. Do you have a problem with the tattoo? That piece of shit Archer Finn had one. They belonged to the same house, the same madam. Maybe they'd work together in other regards, too. Lysandra held her gaze. Archer's dead. Because I gutted him, Aelin said sweetly. Lysandra braced a hand on the back of the couch. She breathed, but then she shook her head and said softly, Good. Good that you killed him. He was a self-serving pig. It could be a lie to win her over. Say your piece, then get out. Lysandra's sensuous mouth tightened, but she laid out Arobynn's plan to free Aedion. It was brilliant, if Aelin felt like being honest, clever, and dramatic and bold. If the king of Ardalan wanted to make a spectacle of Aedion's execution, then they would make a spectacle of his rescue. But to tell her through Lysandra to draw in another person who might betray her or stand witness against her, one more reminder of how easily Aedion's fate could be sealed, should Arobynn decide to make Aelin's life a living hell. I know, the courtesan said, taking in the cold gleam in Aelin's eye. You needn't remind me that you'll skin me alive if I betray you. Aelin felt a muscle flicker in her cheek. And the warning you came to give me? Lysandra shifted on the couch. Arobynn wanted me to tell you the plan so that I might check up on you, test you, see how much you're on his side, see if you're going to betray him. I'd be disappointed if he didn't. I think he also sent me here as an offering. Aelin knew what she meant, but she said, Unfortunately for you, I don't have any interest in women, even when they're paid for. Lysandra's nostrils flared delicately. I think he sent me here so you could kill me, as a present. And you came to beg me to reconsider? No wonder she'd brought the child then. The selfish, spineless coward to use Evangeline as a shield, to bring a child into this world of theirs. Lysandra glanced at the knife strapped to Aelin's thigh. Kill me, if you want. Evangeline already knows what I suspect and won't say a word. Aelin willed her face into a mask of icy calm. But I did come to warn you, Lysandra went on. He might offer you presents, might help you with this rescue, but he is having you watched, and he has his own agenda. That favor you offered him, he didn't tell me what it is, but it's likely to be a trap in one way or another. I'd consider whether his help is worth it and see if you can get out of it. She couldn't, not for about a dozen different reasons. When Aelin didn't respond, Lysandra took a sharp breath. I also came to give you this. She reached a hand into the fold of her rich indigo gown, and Aelin subtly shifted into a defensive position. Lysandra merely pulled out a worn, faded envelope and gingerly set it on the low table before the couch. It shook the whole way down. Never mind, I'm not going to say anything. Never mind, I'm not going to say anything. This is for you. Please read it. So you're Arobynn's whore and... How the fuck do you say that word? Courier? Whatever, now. The courtesan took the verbal slap. This isn't from Arobynn, it's from Wesley. I was gonna say that I thought that it was something from Sam. I thought it was something from Sam. Like maybe she had taken like something that Sam had on him the day that he died or something like that. Ah, but it's from Wesley! Ah! Lysandra seemed to sink into the couch, and there was such an unspeakable grief in her eyes that for a moment Aelin believed it. Wesley, Aelin said, Arobynn's bodyguard. The one who spent most of his time hating me, and the rest of it contemplating ways to kill me. The courtesan nodded. Arobynn murdered Wesley for killing Rorik Farron. Lysandra flinched. Aelin glanced at the envelope. Lysandra dropped her gaze to her hands, clutched together so tightly that her knuckles were bone white. Worn lines marred the envelope, but the chipped seal had yet to be broken. Why have you been carrying a letter to me from Wesley for almost 2 years? Lysandra wouldn't look up, and her voice broke as she said, Because oh. No. Are you joking? Are you joking? Are you for real? Because I loved him very much. Oh, no, me want to cry over Lysandra. Well, of all the things she'd expected Lysandra to say, it started off as a mistake. Arabin would send me back to Clarissa's with him in the carriage as an escort. And at first we were just friends. We talked, and he expected nothing. But then Sam died, and Lysandra jerked her chin at the letter, still lying unopened between them. It's all in there. Everything Arabin did. Everything he planned. What he asked Farron to do to Sam. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! No! No! Of all the things that I wanted, I did not want details of Sam's death. I did not want to know what my baby went through. Oh. And what he ordered done to you. All of it. Wesley wanted you to know because he wanted you to understand. He needed you to understand, Selena, that he didn't know until it was too late. He tried to stop it and did the best he could to avenge Sam. If Arabin hadn't killed him, Wesley was planning to go to Enderveer to get you out. He even went to the Shadow Market to find someone who knew the layout of the mines and got a map of them. I still have it as proof. I can go get it. The words slammed into her. Oh god, I'm gonna fucking cry! Oh my god! Oh my god! Yeah, I don't want details. Yeah, do they give us details? Like, does she read the whole letter and do we know exactly what happened to Sam? Because if we find out exactly what happened to Sam, I don't know if I can read that. I feel like that might be a little too much for me. I'm probably still gonna read it, but it's gonna be really hard. The words slammed into her like a barrage of arrows, but she shut out the sorrow for a man she had never taken the time to consider as anything but one of Arabin's dogs. She wouldn't put it past Arabin to use Lysandra to make up this entire story to get her to trust the woman. The Lysandra she'd known would have been more than happy to do it, and Aelin could have played along just to learn where it would take her, what Arabin was up to, and whether he'd trip up enough to reveal his hand, but what he asked Farron to do to Sam. She'd always assumed Farron had just tortured Sam in the way he so loved to hurt and break people. But for Arabin to request specific things to be done to Sam, it was good she didn't have her magic. Good it was stifled. Because she might have erupted into flames and burned for days, cocooned in her fire. Okay. Fuck. Okay. Fuck. Okay. Okay. Alright. God damn it. So you came here, Aelin said as Lysandra discreetly wiped at her eyes with a handkerchief, to warn me that Arabin might be manipulating me because you finally realized what a monster Arabin truly is after he killed your lover. I promised Wesley I would personally give you that letter. Well, you gave it to me, so get out. Light footsteps sounded, and Evangeline burst from the kitchen, rushing to her mistress with a quiet, nimble grace. With surprising tenderness, Lysandra slipped a reassuring arm around Evangeline as she rose to her feet. I understand, Selena, I do. But I'm begging you, read that letter. For him. Aelin bared her teeth. Get out. Lysandra walked to the door, keeping herself and Evangeline a healthy distance from Aelin. She paused in the doorway. Sam was my friend, too. He and Wesley were my only friends, and Arabin took them both away. Aelin just raised her brows. Lysandra didn't bother with a goodbye as she vanished down the stairs. But Evangeline lingered on the threshold, glancing between her disappearing mistress and Aelin, her lovely hair glimmering like liquid copper. Then the little girl gestured to her scarred face and said, She did this to me. Fuck that bitch. Oh wait, no, she did that to her so she wouldn't be a mistress. Never mind. Lysandra's amazing. Sorry, I connected that in my head just now. She did that so she wouldn't have to grow up being a mistress. Love her. Love her. Love her. It was an effort to keep seated, to keep from leaping down the stairs to slit Lysandra's throat. See, me and Aelin have the same, like, thought process, but yeah. Just put 2 and 2 together, girl. You'll be okay. But Evangeline went on. I cried when my mother sold me to Clarice. Cried and cried. And I think Lysandra had annoyed the mistress that day because they gave me to her as an acolyte, even though she was weeks away from paying her debts. That night, I was supposed to begin training, and I cried so hard I made myself sick. But Lysandra, she cleaned me up. She told me that there was a way out, but it would hurt, and I would not be the same. I couldn't run, because she had tried running a few times when she was my age, and they had found her and beat her where no one could see. She'd never known, never wondered. All this time she had sneered at and mocked Lysandra while they'd grown up. Evangeline continued. I said I'd do anything to get out of what the other girls had told me about. So she told me to trust her, and then gave me these. She started shouting loud enough for the others to come running. They thought she cut me out of anger, and said she'd done it to keep me from being a threat, and she let them believe it. Clarice was so mad that she beat Lysandra in the courtyard, but Lysandra didn't cry, not once. And when the healer said my face couldn't be fixed, Clarice made Lysandra buy me for the amount I would have cost if I had been a full courtesan like her. That's what happened to her fucking blood money. Oh my god. Love her. Love her. Aelin had no words. Evangeline said, that's why she's still working for Clarice. Why she's still not free and won't be for a while. I thought you should know. Aelin wanted to tell herself not to trust the girl, that this could be part of Lysandra and Arobyn's plan, but there was a voice in her head, in her bones, that whispered to her, over and over and over, each time clearer and louder. Nehemiah would have done the same. Evangeline curtsied and went down the stairs, leaving Aelin staring at the worn envelope. If she herself could change so much in 2 years, perhaps so could Lysandra. And for a moment, she wondered how another young woman's life would have been different if she'd stopped to talk to her, really talk to Caltaine Rompier, instead of dismissing her as a vapid courtier. What would have happened if Nehemiah had tried to see past Caltaine's mask, too? Evangeline was climbing into the rain-gleaming carriage beside Lysandra when Aelin appeared at the warehouse door and said, wait. Chapter 10. We're fucking seeing Aedion? We're fucking seeing Aedion? No offense to my man, but I want Lysandra. Chapter 10. Aedion's vision was swimming, his every breath gloriously difficult. Soon, he could feel death squatting in the corner of his cell, counting down the last of his breaths, a lion waiting to pounce. Ever so often, Aedion would smile toward those gathered shadows. The infection had spread, and within 2 days until the spectacle at which he was to be executed, his death was coming soon to none. None too soon, sorry. The guards assumed he was sleeping to pass the time. Aedion was waiting for his food, watching the small barred window and the top of the cell door for any sign of the guard's arrival, but he was fairly sure he was hallucinating when the door opened and the crowd... Not my husband walking in. And the crown prince strolled in. There were no guards behind him, no sign of any escort as the prince stared from the doorway. The prince's unmoving face told him immediately what he needed to know. This was not a rescue attempt, and the black stone collar around the prince's throat told him everything else. Things had not gone well the day Sorstra had been murdered. He managed to grin. Good to see you, princeling. The prince ran an eye over Aedion's dirty hair, the beard that had grown during these past few weeks, and then over the pile of vomit in the corner from when he hadn't been able to make it to the bucket an hour ago. Aedion drawled as best he could. The least you could do is take me to dinner before looking at me like that. The prince's sapphire eyes flicked to his, and Aedion blinked past the haze covering his vision. What studied him was cold, predatory, and not quite human. Quietly, Aedion said, Dorian. The thing that was now the prince smiled a little. The captain had said those rings of wordstone enslaved the mind, the soul. He'd seen the collar waiting beside the king's throne and had wondered if it was the same. Worse. Tell me what happened in the throne room, Dorian. Aedion wheezed, his head pounding. The prince blinked slowly. Nothing happened. Why are you here, Dorian? Adian had never addressed the prince by his given name, but using it, reminding him, somehow seemed important, even if it only provoked the prince into killing him. I came to look at the infamous general before they execute you like in... Sorry, I read that so bad. Sorry. I had so much saliva in my mouth. I came to look at the infamous general before they execute you like an animal. No chance of being killed today, then. The same way they executed your Sorstra. Though the prince didn't move, Adian could have sworn he recoiled, as if someone yanked on a leash, as if there was still someone in need of leashing. I don't know what you're talking about. The thing inside the prince said, but its nostrils flared. Sorstra, Adian breathed, his lungs aching. Sorstra, your woman, the healer. I was standing beside you when they cut off her head. I heard you screaming as you dove for her body. The thing went a bit rigid, and Adian pressed. Where did they bury her, Dorian? What did they do with her body? The body of the woman you loved. I don't know what you're talking about, it said again. Sorstra, Adian panted, his breathing uneven. Her name was Sorstra, and she loved you, and they killed her. The man who put that collar around your neck killed her. The thing was quiet. Then it tilted its head. The smile it gave him was horrifying in its beauty. I shall enjoy watching you die, General. Adian coughed out a laugh. The prince, the thing he'd become, turned smoothly and strode out, and Adian might have laughed again, for spite and defiance, had he not heard the prince say something in the hall. The general is sick. See to it that he's attended to immediately. Fuck! No! No. The thing must have smelled it on him. Adian could do nothing as a healer was summoned, an older woman named Amethy. Fuck that bitch! And he was held down, too weak to fight back as she attended his wounds. She shoved a tonic down his throat that made him choke. The wound was washed and bound, and his shackles were shortened until he couldn't move his hands enough to rip out the stitching. The tonics kept coming, every hour, no matter how hard he bit, no matter how forcefully he tried to clamp his mouth shut. So they saved him. And Adian cursed and swore at death for failing him, even as he silently prayed to Mala, Lightbringer, to keep Aelin away from the party, away from the prince, and away from the king and his wordstone callers. Oops, sorry, excuse me. The thing inside him left the dungeons and headed into the glass castle, steering his body like a ship, and now it forced him to be still as they stood before the man he often saw in those moments that pierced through the darkness. The man was seated on a glass throne, smiling faintly as he said, "Bow." The thing inside him yanked hard on their bond, lightning spearing his muscles, ordering them to obey. It was how he'd been forced to descend into those dungeons where the golden-haired warrior had said her name so many times that he began screaming, even if he made no sound. He was still screaming at his muscles, as his muscles betrayed him yet again, bringing him to his knees, the tendons on his neck lashing with pain, forcing him to bow his head. Still resisting? The man said, glancing at the dark ring on his finger, as though it possessed the answer already. I could feel both of you in there. Interesting. Yes, that thing in the darkness was growing stronger, now able to reach through the invisible wall between them and puppet him, speak through him, but not entirely, not for long amounts of time. He patched up the holes as best he could, but it kept breaking through. Demon. A demon prince. And he saw that moment, over and over and over, when the woman he loved had lost her head. Hearing her name on the general's raspy tongue had made him start walling. I don't know, on the other wall of his mind, the barrier that kept him locked in the dark, but the darkness in his mind was a sealed tomb. The man on the throne said, "Report." The commander shuddered through him, and he spit out the details of his encounter, every word and action, and the thing, the demon, delighted in his horror at it. Clever of Adian to try to quietly die on me, the man said. He must think his cousin has a good chance of arriving at your party then, if he's so desperate to rob us of our entertainment. He kept silent, as he had not been instructed to speak. The man looked him over, those black eyes full of delight. I should have done this years ago. I don't know why I wasted so much time waiting to see whether you'd have any power. Foolish of me. He tried to speak, tried to move, tried to do anything with that mortal body of his, but the demon gripped his mind like a fist, and the muscles of his face slid into a smile as he said, "It's my pleasure to serve, Majesty." Fuck this bitch. Okay, I think we can make it. I've got 10 minutes left. I think we can make it. Chapter 11. The shadow market had operated along the banks of the Avery for as long as Rifthold had existed, maybe longer. Legend claimed it had been built in the bones of the god of truth so that it would keep the vendors and would-be thieves honest. Cale supposed it was ironic, considering there was no god of truth. As far as he knew, contraband, illicit substances, spices, clothes, flesh, the market catered to any and all clientele, if they were brave or foolish or desperate enough to venture inside. When he'd first come here weeks ago, Cale had been all of those things, as he climbed down the half-rotted wooden staircase from a crumbling section of the docks into the embankment itself, where alcoves and tunnels and shops were tunneled into the riverbank. Cloaked, armed figures patrolled the long, broad quay that served as the only path to the market. During rainy periods, the Avery would often rise high enough to flood the quay, and sometimes unlucky merchants and shoppers drowned inside the labyrinth of the shadow market. During drier months, you never knew what or who you might find selling their wares and meandering through the dirty, damp tunnels. The market was packed tonight, even after a day of rain, a small relief, and another small relief as thunder reverberated through the subterranean wherein, setting everyone murmuring. The vendors in lowlifes would be too busy preparing for the storm to take notice, or Cale and Nesrin as they strode down one of the main passageways. The thunder rattled the hanging lanterns of colored glass, strangely beautiful, as if someone had once been determined to give this place some loveliness, that served as the main lights in the brown caverns, casting plenty of those shadows the market was so notorious for. Shadows for dark dealings, shadows to slip a knife between the ribs or to spirit someone away, or for conspirators to meet. No one had bothered them as they'd slipped through one of the rough holes that served as an entrance to the shadow market's tunnels. They connected to the sewer somewhere, and he would bet that the more established vendors possessed their own secret exits beneath their stalls or shops. Vendor after vendor had set up stalls of wood or stone, with some wares displayed on tables or crates or in baskets, but most valuable goods hidden. A spice dealer offered everything from saffron to cinnamon, but even the most fragrant spices couldn't conceal the cloyingly sweet stench of the opium stashed beneath his displays. Once, long ago, Cale might have cared about the illegal substances, about the vendors selling whatever they pleased. He might have bothered to try to shut this place down. Now, they were nothing but resources. As a city guard, Nesrin probably felt the same way, even if just by being in here, she was jeopardizing her own safety. This was a neutral zone, but its denizens didn't take kindly to authority. He didn't blame them. The shadow market had been one of the first places the King of Ardalan had purged after magic vanished, seeking out vendors who claimed to have banned books or still working charms and potions, as well as magic wielders desperate for a cure or a glimmer of magic. The punishments hadn't been pretty. Cale almost heaved a sigh of relief when he spotted the two cloaked figures with a spread of knives for sale at a makeshift stand tucked into a dark corner, exactly where they'd planned, and they'd done a hell of a job making it look authentic. Nesrin slowed her steps, pausing at various vendors, no more than a bored shopper, killing time until the rain ceased. Cale kept close to her, his weapons in prowling gait enough to... Sorry, y'all. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time reading right now. Cale kept close to her, his weapons in prowling gait enough to deter any foolish pickpockets from trying their luck. The punch he'd taken to his ribs earlier that night made maintaining his crawling pace and scowl all the easier. He and a few others had interrupted a vowed commander in the midst of dragging a young man into the tunnels, and Cale had been so damn distracted by Dorian, by what Aelin had said and done, that he'd been sloppy. So he'd earned that blow to the ribs, and the painful reminder of it each time he drew breath. No distractions, no slip-ups, not when there was so much to do. At last, Cale and Nesrin paused by the little stall, staring down at the dozen knives and short swords displayed across the threadbare blanket. This place is even more depraved than the rumor suggested, Brullo said from the shadows of his hood. I feel like I should cover poor Ress's eyes in half these chambers. Ress chuckled. I'm 19, old man. Nothing here surprises me. Ress glanced at Nesrin, who was fingering one of the curved blades. Apologies, lady. I'm 22, she said flatly, and I think we city guards see a great deal more than you palace princesses. What Cale could see of Ress's face flushed. He could have sworn even Brullo was smiling, and for a moment he couldn't breathe under the crushing weight that pushed in on him. There had been a time when this teasing was normal, when he'd sat in public with his men and laughed, when he hadn't been 2 days away from unleashing hell on the castle that had once been his home. Any news? He managed to say to Brullo, who was watching him too closely, as if his old mentor could see the agony ripping through him. We got the layout of the party this morning, Brullo said tightly. Cale picked up a blade as Brullo reached into the pocket of his cloak. He made a good show of examining the dagger, then holding up a few fingers as if haggling for it. Brullo went on. The new captain of the guard spread us all out, none of us in the Great Hall itself. The weapons master held up his own fingers, leaning forward, and Cale shrugged, reaching into his cloak for the coins. You think he suspects anything? Cale said, handing over the coins. Nesrin closed in, blocking any outside view as Cale's hand met Brullo's and coppers crunched against paper. The small, folded maps were in Cale's pocket before anyone noticed. No, Ress answered. The bastard just wants to demean us. He probably thinks some of us are loyal to you, but we'd be dead if he suspected any of us in particular. Be careful, Cale said. He sensed Nesrin tensing a heartbeat before another female voice drawled. 3 coppers for his Andrian blade. If I'd known there was a sale happening, I would have brought more money. Every muscle in Cale's body locked up as he discovered Aelin now standing at Nesrin's side. Of course, she'd tracked them here. Holy gods, Ress breathed. Beneath the shadows of her dark hood, Aelin's grin was nothing short of wicked. Hello, Ress. Brullo. Sorry to see your palace jobs aren't paying you enough these days. The weapons master was glancing between her and the passageways. You didn't say she was back, he said to Cale. Aelin clicked her tongue. Cale, it seems, likes to keep information to himself. He clenched his fists at his side. You're drawing too much attention to us. Am I? Aelin lifted a dagger, weighing it in her hands with expert ease. I need to talk to Brullo and my old friend Ress. Since you refused to let me come the other night, this was the only way. So typical of her. Nesrin had taken a casual step away, monitoring the carved tunnels, or avoiding the queen. Queen. The word struck him again. A queen of the realm was in the shadow market, in head-to-toe black, and looking more than happy to start slitting throats. He hadn't been wrong to fear her reunion with Adian, what they might do together, and if she had her magic. Take off your hood, Brullo said quietly. Aelin looked up. Why? And now, I want to see your face. Aelin went still. But Nesrin turned back and leaned a hand on the table. I saw her face last night, Brullo, and it's as pretty as before. Don't you have a wife to ogle anyway? Aelin snorted. I think I rather like you, Nesrin Falik. Nesrin gave Aelin a half-smile, practically beaming coming from her. Cale wondered whether Aelin would like Nesrin if she knew about their history, or whether the queen would even care. Aelin tugged back her hood, only far enough for the light to hit her face. She winked at Ress, who grinned. I missed you, friend, she said. Color stained Ress's cheeks. Okay, not Ress being a little cutie! Brullo's mouth tightened as Aelin looked at him again. For a moment, the weapons master studied her. Then he murmured, I see. The queen stiffened almost imperceptibly. Brullo bowed his head, ever so slightly. You're going to rescue Adian. Aelin pulled her hood into place and inclined her head in confirmation, the swaggering assassin incarnate. I am. Ress swore filthily under his breath. Aelin leaned closer to Brullo. I know I'm asking a great deal of you. Then don't ask it. Cale snapped. Don't endanger them. They risk enough. That's not your call to make, she said. Like hell it wasn't. If they're discovered, we lose our inside source of information, not to mention their lives. What do you plan to do about Dorian? Or is it only Adian you care about? They were all watching far too closely. Her nostrils flared, but Brullo said, What is it you require of us, lady? Oh, the weapons master definitely knew then. He must have seen Adian recently enough to have recognized those eyes, that face, and coloring the moment she pulled back her hood. Perhaps he had suspected it for months now. Aelin said softly, Don't let your men be stationed at the southern wall of the gardens. Cale blinked. Not a request or an order, but a warning. Brullo's voice was slightly hoarse as he said, Anywhere else we should avoid? She was already backing away, shaking her head as if she were a disinterested buyer. Just tell your men to pin a red flower on their uniforms. If anyone asks, say it's to honor the prince on his birthday. But wear them where they can be seen easily. Cale glanced at her hands. Her dark gloves were clean. How much blood would stain them in a few days? Ress loosed a breath and said to her, Thank you. It wasn't until she'd vanished into the crowd with a jaunty swagger that Cale realized that thanks were indeed in order. Aelin Galathinius was about to turn the glass palace into a killing field, and Ress, Brullo, and his men had all been spared. She still hadn't said anything about Dorian, about whether he could be spared or saved. Okay, y'all. Oh, I have one more page. Okay, period. I'll just read this. I thought they were going to jump straight into his birthday, but I'll read this, and then I'll go. Aylin had known she had eyes on her from the moment she'd left the shadow market after finishing some shopping of her own. She strode right into the Royal Bank of Ardalan anyway. She had business to attend to, and though they'd been minutes away from closing for the day, the master of the bank had been more than happy to assist her with her inquiries. He never once questioned the fake name her accounts were under. As the master talked about her various accounts and the interest they'd gathered over the years, she took in the details of his office. Thick oak-paneled walls, pictures that had revealed no hidey holes in the bare minutes she'd had to snoop while he summoned his secretary to bring in tea, and ornate furniture that cost more than most citizens of Rifthold made in a lifetime, including a gorgeous mahogany armoire where many of his wealthiest clients' files, including hers, were kept, locked up with a little gold key he kept on his desk. She'd risen as he again scuttled through the double doors of his office to withdraw the sum of money she would take with her that night. While he was in the anteroom, giving the order to his secretary, Aylin had casually made her way over to his desk, surveying the papers stacked and strewn about, the various gifts from clients, keys, and a little portrait of a woman who could either be a wife or a daughter. With men like him, it was impossible to tell. He'd returned just as she casually slid a hand into the pocket of her cloak. She made small talk about the weather until the secretary appeared, a little box in hand. Dumping the contents into her coin purse with as much grace as she could muster, Aylin had thanked the secretary and the master and breezed out of the office. She took side streets and alleys, ignoring the stench of rotting flesh that even the rain couldn't conceal. She'd counted 2 butchering blocks in once pleasant city squares. The bodies left for the crows had been mere shadows against the pale stone walls where they'd been nailed. Aylin wouldn't risk capturing one of the Valg until after Adian was saved, if she made it out alive. But that didn't mean she couldn't get a head start on it. A chill fog had blanketed the world the night before, seeping in through every nook and cranny. Nestled under layers of quilts and down blankets, Aylin rolled over in bed and stretched a hand across the mattress, reaching lazily for the warm male body beside hers. What? Cold, silken sheets slid against her fingers. She opened an eye. This wasn't Wendelin. The luxurious bed, bedecked in shades of cream and beige, belonged to her apartment in Rifthold, and the other half of the bed was neatly made, its pillows and blankets undisturbed, empty. For a moment she could see Rowan there, that harsh, unforgiving face softened into handsomeness by sleep, his silver hair glimmering in the morning light, so stark against the tattoo stretching from his left temple down his neck, over his shoulder, all the way to his fingertips. Aylin loosed a tight breath, rubbing her eyes. Dreaming was bad enough. She would not waste energy missing him, wishing he were here to talk everything through, or to just have the comfort of waking up beside him and knowing he existed. She swallowed hard, her body too heavy as she rose from the bed. She had told herself once that it wasn't a weakness to need Rowan's help, to want his help, and that perhaps there was a kind of strength in acknowledging that, but he wasn't a crutch, and she never wanted him to become one. Still, as she downed her cold breakfast, she wished she hadn't felt such a strong need to prove that to herself weeks ago, especially when word arrived via urchin banging on the warehouse door that she'd been summoned to the Assassin's Keep immediately. Dun, dun, dun! Alright, y'all, I gotta go. Only thoughts from today are, I knew I was gonna end up liking Lysandra. Like, I knew that she was never a bitch. She was just a girl in a hard fucking world, in a hard fucking place, with these fucking monsters raising her. But yeah, I love her. I wish the best for her. I hope she gets out. I hope she doesn't die. Knowing her character's probably gonna fucking die. So, see you next time for the party. Oh, fuck! Yeah, I'll go live. I might be going live later on Saturday because I do have to work for like half the day. I need to figure out the hours that I'm working on Saturday, and then I'll see. I have to get my class ready. We're switching classes, so I have to get all that ready before I go live on Saturday, so I'll let you guys know. But yeah, well, I'll see you guys on Saturday for the fucking party. Bye! Love y'all!